They were born on the same day, shared the same womb, and grew up under the same roof, yet only one was loved. This is a heartbreaking story of favoritism, betrayal, and redemption. Stay with us as we take you through the journey of Hope, the forgotten twin who turned her pain into power. The sun had barely touched the rooftops of the quiet village when twin cries echoed from a tiny hut at the edge of the farmland. That day, Mr. Adamu, a weary but hopeful farmer, paced back and forth with his worn-out cap in hand, while his wife, Ife, fought through labour pains that felt like pulling life from death. And then, it happened. 2 cries, identical in pitch and rhythm, burst into the air. 2 baby girls were born on the same day, at the same time, from the same womb. They named them Faith and Hope. From the very beginning, it was hard to tell them apart. Their cheeks puffed the same, their cries sounded like echoes, and their eyes shimmered with the same light. Even the villagers often joked, you'd have to be their mother to know who's who. But something happened just a few days after their birth. Something that shaped the course of their lives. Mr. Adamu and his wife, driven by deep belief in destiny, carried their newborns to the home of a respected elder who lived by the edge of the forest. He was known to read destinies, to see beyond what eyes could see. The old man held the twins, closed his eyes, and after a long silence he said softly, "One of these girls will be a great light. She will change your story and bring honor beyond imagination." He never said which daughter. But as the girls began to grow, and Faith's brilliance began to show in school while Hope struggled to keep up, the parents made their own decision. Faith was the chosen one. From that moment on, everything began to tilt. At first it was subtle. Each time Mr. Adamu returned from the farm, he would come back with roasted groundnuts or sweet mangoes, but always handed them to Faith first. "This is for my brilliant banker-to-be," he'd say with pride, patting her head. Hope would stretch her hands quietly, only to hear, "You can share with your sister." Over time she stopped stretching her hands at all. As the girls grew, so did the divide. No one saw coming. Faith was the golden child. She would always score perfectly on her tests, 100% each time, like the numbers were in love with her. Hope, on the other hand, tried. She truly did, but her report cards bore 60S and 65S, average, not failing, just invisible. Every term, Hope would return home holding her card with trembling hands, only to realize Faith had already presented hers and her parents were deep in celebration. "Ah, my daughter scored 100 again. She'll be a great banker one day," Ife would boast to the neighbors. No one ever asked Hope for hers. No one ever noticed the quiet tears she blinked back. She grew up surrounded by applause that was never meant for her. Her childhood was spent standing in the shadow of a sister who didn't ask for the spotlight but couldn't help being in it. The neglect wasn't just emotional. It was foundational. She was raised to believe she was ordinary, while her twin was extraordinary. Still, Hope worked. She would wake up early to help her mother arrange vegetables in the market, return in time to help her father gather firewood, and still study late into the night. But it didn't matter. No one was watching. Then came the day that shattered her already cracking heart. After they both completed secondary school, the family sat beneath the old mango tree behind their house. The sun was high, casting long shadows over dry ground. Mr. Adamu's face was stern. Ife's eyes didn't even glance at Hope. "We can't afford to send both of you to university," Mr. Adamu said. The words hung in the air like a curse. Hope's fingers clenched the edge of her wrapper. Deep down she already knew, but the blow still came hard. "Let your sister go," Ife said firmly. "She's smarter than you." Hope blinked. For a moment, the world spun. Her mother's words sliced through her soul like a knife. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking under her. No one stopped her. No one called her name. Behind the hut, where no one could see, she collapsed to the ground and buried her face in her palms. "Am I not their daughter too?" she whispered. "Why are they so wicked to me?" A month later, Faith left for Lagos to study accounting. The village buzzed with pride. Ife became the talk of the market, always introducing herself as the mother of that brilliant girl in Lagos. But no one noticed Hope. Now waking at dawn to follow her father to the farm, her small arms carrying baskets too heavy for her size. No one noticed her selling pepper under the scorching sun, while her sister sat in a lecture hall with a bright future ahead of her. She wasn't just forgotten. She was left behind. And yet, through the silence, the pain and the shadow she lived in, a quiet voice kept whispering inside her heart. Don't give up, Hope. The morning sun peeked through the raffia roof, casting warm streaks across the dusty floor of the Adamu's small mud house. Inside, Hope sat on the bamboo bed, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Her eyes, red and swollen from the night's tears, stared blankly ahead. She could still hear her mother's words echoing in her ears. Let your sister go, she is smarter than you. Though she had anticipated it, hearing it aloud broke her in a way she never imagined. Faith, sitting proudly beside her, said nothing. She didn't gloat, she didn't console either. She simply sat in silence, accepting the verdict like a queen being crowned. I'm still your daughter too, Hope muttered to herself after running out of the gathering the day before. Why do they treat me like I'm a mistake? For days, the house felt even smaller than before. The atmosphere was tense. Mr. Adamu spent longer hours at the farm, and Ife, their mother, seemed more excited than ever as she boasted around the market. My daughter is going to the university in Lagos. She's going to be an accountant. Hope heard it all. Her friend, Kike, who sold Akara with her mother beside Ife's stall, would come back with updates. She was even showing them Faith's JAMB result, Kike whispered one day. They were all clapping. Hope forced a smile. Inside, she was shrinking. At night, while lying alone on the mat, she would stare at the ceiling, dreaming of a different life, one where she mattered too. She wanted to write. She used to scribble stories on old notebooks and recite them to herself, but now even her dreams felt far away. Back in Lagos, Faith was enjoying a different reality. In her first year, she called home regularly, studied hard, and promised to make them proud. But things changed in her second year. She met new friends, started partying, and stopped calling as often. She posted flashy pictures on Facebook, wigs, makeup, nightclubs. But in the village, Ife still walked around with pride, saying, My Faith will work in a bank soon. You people should watch out. Hope said nothing, but deep down she whispered to herself, One day, they'll know my name too. Little did she know, that day was not far off. Hope had never imagined she'd leave the village so suddenly, but Mrs. Oyen's visit changed everything. The day after Mrs. Oyen offered her the job, Hope packed her few belongings, her heart pounding with both excitement and fear. For the first time in years, Hope felt like she was about to step into something new, something different from the life of hard work and neglect she had known in her village. Her parents didn't protest. They had no objections to her going, though deep down, Hope knew they weren't as enthusiastic as she was. They were so focused on Faith and her studies that Hope's dreams never seemed to matter. Still, Hope pushed those thoughts aside. This was her chance to do something for herself. 3 days after Mrs. Oyem's offer, they were on a bus to Lagos. The city was overwhelming for Hope, with its tall buildings, busy streets and unfamiliar noises, but she was determined to make it work. They arrived around 2 p.m, with the sun still high in the sky, and Hope could hardly believe that she was actually here. Mrs. Oyen led Hope to her house, a modest apartment on the outskirts of Lagos. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt like a palace compared to her village home. You'll stay here for tonight and rest, Mrs. Oyen said warmly. Tomorrow we'll go to the company where you'll start working. Hope lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, a smile creeping across her face. She had finally left the village. She had taken the first step toward a new life. It felt surreal, but she was determined to prove that she could make it here. The next morning, after a good night's sleep, Mrs. Oyen took Hope to the company where she'd be working. Hope had expected something simple, but when she walked through the doors of the company, she realized this was no ordinary place. It was a thriving business, with sleek offices and well-dressed professionals walking around. Mrs. Oyen introduced her to the female manager, who welcomed Hope warmly and showed her to her new workspace, a cleaning station on the office floor. Hope's task seemed simple: keep the place tidy, ensure everything was spotless. But she threw herself into the work with a determination that surprised even herself. As she worked, she noticed the people in the office eyeing her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. They didn't expect much from someone who was just a cleaner. But Hope didn't mind. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to work and build her future. Days passed, and Hope began to settle into the routine. Despite her role, Hope often went above and beyond her duties. When a colleague needed a file, Hope would deliver it, even though it wasn't part of her job. If someone had a question, Hope was quick to help. Soon she was known not just as the cleaner, but as the helpful, diligent worker. One day, while Hope was wiping down the reception desk, she caught the attention of the young CEO, Edward. He had noticed her from afar, observing how she diligently carried out her tasks with no complaint. Unlike the others, Hope didn't seem to care about status or what people thought. She simply worked, and worked hard. Edward had seen many young women in his life, especially in the corporate world. But there was something different about Hope. He wasn't sure if it was her quiet determination or the way she carried herself, but he wanted to know more. She wasn't like the others, those who only cared about looks or how much they could get out of a relationship. No, Hope was different. She seemed sincere, humble, and hardworking. The next day, Edward asked to speak to Hope. "I've been watching you," he began, his voice calm but serious. "You're not like the others here. You're dedicated, and that's rare in people your age." Hope didn't know how to respond. She was still adjusting to the hustle and bustle of the office, and now her boss was noticing her. "I want to thank you for your hard work," Edward continued, his gaze steady. "You're a true asset to this company. If you ever need anything, let me know." Hope nodded, but inside, her heart fluttered. She had never imagined that someone like Edward, successful, handsome, and powerful, would take notice of her. She had never thought she was special enough for someone like him to care. But as days went on, Edward made it clear that he valued her work. He would check in on her from time to time, asking if she needed anything or just to compliment her on her diligence. Hope couldn't help but feel a warmth in her chest every time they spoke. It wasn't long before Hope began to notice that Edward's attention toward her was more than just professional. There was something else in his gaze, something she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. As the days turned into weeks, Hope's life in Lagos started to take shape. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was beginning to feel like a person of worth, someone who had something to offer, beyond the life of being overshadowed by her sister Faith. She wasn't going to let her past define her anymore. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger than she ever expected. Few months later, Mr. Edward began to notice just how peaceful, obedient, and committed Hope was to her work. Her dedication touched him deeply. Despite how stunningly beautiful she was, she never behaved like someone who believed her beauty was a shortcut to success. She minded her business, respected everyone, and did every task diligently, even the ones outside her official duties. Edward had seen many ladies like her before, or so he thought. In his world, women often gave what they had to get what they wanted. It was the norm. In fact, Hope's twin sister Faith was one of the ladies Edward had met once at a social event, full of charm and flirty smiles. But Edward was different from his friends. He craved real love, not lust. Though he spent time with women for companionship, he never went further. He knew most of them only loved his money and face, not the man within. As months passed, Edward started getting closer to Hope. He would call her to bring him files, ask her to pick up coffee or deliver things to his office, just to test if her goodness was genuine or just a facade. But Hope always responded with humility and a gentle smile, never complaining. Her quiet strength drew him in even more. He couldn't help but talk about her to his two closest friends. They laughed at him. "She's pretending," one said. "Don't be fooled." "There are no good girls left, Edward. Let's prove it," the other added. At first Edward refused. He had grown fond of Hope. But curiosity crept in. What if they were right? He needed to know. Reluctantly, he agreed to their test. One evening after closing hours, when the office was quiet and Hope was the last staff cleaning up, Edward had already left. His friend Gabriel walked in, pretending to be there to see Edward. Hope greeted him politely and told him Edward had gone. As she turned to continue cleaning, Gabriel stopped her. "I like your vibe. Can I get your number? Just want to be friends," he said smoothly. Hope hesitated. Her instincts warned her, but Gabriel insisted it was harmless. She finally gave in and shared her number, believing his intentions were pure. Over the next few days, Gabriel and Hope chatted. Then, one day, Gabriel crossed the line. He asked her to come to a hotel, promising her a huge amount of money in return for fun. Hope was heartbroken. She felt insulted, used, and ashamed. She blocked him immediately, tears welling in her eyes. "What does he think I am, a prostitute?" she whispered to herself. Her heart ached with disappointment. Weeks passed. One morning, Gabriel came to the office again. This time, Edward was inside with Hope. The moment she saw Gabriel, she hissed and tried to walk out, but Edward stopped her. "Please stay," he said softly. Gabriel stepped forward. "I'm sorry. Please, forgive me. It was a test, a stupid prank. Edward wanted to know if you were really different. And you proved us wrong. You're real. There are still good girls like you." Hope's eyes filled with tears. What if she had failed? What if she'd fallen for it? Her chest tightened at the thought. So this is how she could lost her virginity in a careless, meaningless way. Gabriel left the room. Edward walked closer to her, his voice low and sincere. "I'm truly sorry, Hope. I've liked you since the first day you came, but I didn't believe someone like you still existed. I doubted you." Hope wiped her tears, forcing a smile. "But, sir, how could you assume that?" As she turned to leave, Edward gently held her hand. "You haven't replied to my proposal." Hope paused. "What would people say, sir? That I seduced you? That I came here pretending to be pure just to win your heart?" "No one will say that," Edward replied. "I'm their boss, and if they do, I'll defend you. We'll prove them wrong. Please, give me a chance." Hope nodded slowly. "I'll think about it and give you a reply." That night, when she returned to her room, she was overwhelmed with joy. She screamed into her pillow, jumping on the bed like a child. Edward had always been her secret crush. His charm and character had won her heart long ago. She just never believed he'd notice her. Days passed. They began dating quietly, just as Hope requested. She didn't want the attention yet, and Edward respected that. He adored her deeply, showering her with love and thoughtful gifts. Meanwhile, Faith was still clubbing, spending time with different men. Her studies suffered terribly. She preferred night outings to lectures, and eventually her grades collapsed. A few months later, Edward made a promise that changed Hope's life. He would sponsor her through school so she could chase her dream of becoming a writer. Hope was overwhelmed. Her parents had never supported her dream. They always favoured Faith. She never even dared to tell them what she truly wanted. 2 years later, Faith finally graduated, but with very poor grades. No company or bank would employ her. Hope, on the other hand, had become one of the best students in her class. She graduated with honours. After 4 years of love and growth, Edward proposed. Hope said yes. Back in the village, Mr. Adam and his wife, If, were troubled. Faith had returned home in shame, pregnant by a bad boy who refused to accept responsibility. Sadly, she lost the baby. In confusion, they visited their herbalist again, seeking answers. The herbalist looked at them calmly. "I never told you to favour one child over the other. I only said one would be greater. Is that not life? Not everyone succeeds equally. Tears streamed down Ife's face. She remembered how cruelly she had treated Hope, her own daughter. One day, Faith learned of Edward's engagement to Hope. She rushed to confront him, dressed seductively. "She's not your level. I'm more presentable than her," she said boldly. Edward looked at her coldly. "It's not about presentation, it's about substance, and you tried to snatch your sister's fiancé. That's unacceptable." Later, Hope explained everything to Edward, how her parents had favoured Faith, how she had grown up feeling invisible. A year after their engagement, Edward and Hope visited the village together. By now, Hope was a respected professional writer in Lagos, working with a popular company. Her parents broke down in tears. "We are sorry, my child," Ife cried, kneeling. "Forgive us. And thank you, Edward, for loving our daughter the way we never did." Hope hugged her mother gently, the pain of the past slowly melting into forgiveness. She had finally become everything they said she couldn't be, and more. After their emotional visit to the village, Edward and Hope returned to Lagos, but something inside Hope had shifted. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but seeing her mother on her knees, the same woman who once looked her in the eye and showed no affection, melted her heart. Hope began to feel peace, not because the past was erased, but because it no longer held power over her. Edward stood by her side through everything. He respected her silence, comforted her when memories returned, and reminded her daily of how proud he was of her strength. As Hope returned to her job at the publishing company, she poured her feelings into her writing. Her articles began gaining attention, raw, emotional pieces that told stories of girls who were once forgotten, unloved, and uncelebrated. Her editor saw something special in her and promoted her to lead creative writer. Within months, Hope's articles were featured in top national publications. Readers began to fall in love with the girl who wrote with her heart. Faith, on the other hand, was still lost. After the heartbreak and shame, she found herself feeling truly alone. The same friends she once parted with abandoned her. No one wanted to associate with someone who had failed both in school and in life. Her mother, Ife, began to realize how dangerous blind favoritism could be. She tried to draw Faith closer, but it wasn't the same. Faith had grown bitter, especially seeing how Hope was blossoming. One evening, Faith came to Lagos unannounced. She stood at Hope's apartment door, uninvited, unsure of what to say. When Hope opened the door, Faith broke down into tears. "I'm sorry, Hope. I was wrong. I was proud. I let Mum and Dad's love spoil me. I should have known better. But it's too late now." Hope pulled her into a hug without a word. "No," she whispered. "It's never too late to do the right thing." That night, for the first time in years, the sisters talked. Not as enemies, but as the twins they once were. They cried, they laughed, and they prayed. Hope didn't remind Faith of her past mistakes. She reminded her of her future, what was still possible. 1 year later, Lagos was buzzing with joy as the most anticipated wedding of the year was underway. Hope and Edward were finally tying the knot. The girl once looked down upon now stood radiant in a stunning ivory gown, her natural curls wrapped into a regal bun, a soft veil resting like a cloud on her head. Edward stood at the altar, eyes locked on her with admiration. In his eyes, Hope wasn't just a bride, she was his answered prayer, his inspiration, his peace. Guests filled the hall, friends, colleagues, and even some of the office workers who once gossiped about her. Now they clapped and cheered. Even Faith was there, standing by her sister's side as her maid of honor. Her own journey of healing had begun too. She was now enrolled in a creative course, trying to rebuild her life, with Hope's support. Mr. Adam and Ife sat quietly in the front row, tears in their eyes. Their hearts were heavy with both regret and gratitude. They had lost so many years, but in that moment, seeing their daughter celebrated, honored, and cherished by a man like Edward, they knew grace had covered them. During the vows, Edward's voice cracked. "You taught me that goodness still exists in this world. You healed me with your innocence. I promise to protect your heart forever." Hope's hands trembled as she responded. "And you gave me what I never had: love, safety, belief. I promise to love you with the heart that once only knew pain." As they kissed to seal the union, the room erupted in cheers. Weeks later, the couple returned to the village, this time not as visitors, but as symbols of hope and restoration. Hope was now a published author. Her first book, The Girl They Forgot, climbing bestseller lists. In the same compound where she was once mocked and ignored, people now gathered to greet her. Her old neighbours couldn't believe how far she had come. Her mother served food, smiling through tears, telling everyone that her daughter had made her proud. Edward held Hope's hand throughout, never letting go. That evening, as the sun sank over the rooftops of the village, Hope stood quietly by the window of her childhood room, now clean, repainted and shining. She looked outside, watching the children run barefoot, chasing dreams she once couldn't dare to dream. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because, finally, everything was worth it. If you enjoyed this story, kindly drop the lesson you learned from it in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching.